single day. I'm gonna make something great.
Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Hope Base, a place where we share stories of people who have survived one form of abuse or another in order to encourage those who are going through similar situations to find hope and strength to overcome their challenges. We want to especially thank those who have written in their stories so far. It means a lot to us. And in case you can't share your story, you can't write your story, you can send a voice note. I'll leave a WhatsApp link below where you can send in your voice notes. If you want to share your story with us, feel free to write in. Our email address again is thehopebase@gmail.com. My name is dumbfounded. Before we go into the story for today, let's go for a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Last week we brought you a story of Eno. Eno wrote in all the way from Calabar to share her story. In case you missed that episode, I'll leave a link below. Today we have a story from Rita. Rita wrote in all the way from Kenya. Let's dive right in. I was in my third year in the university when I met Leo. Leo was a final year mechanical engineering student. I was studying psychology, which was a 4-year course, so I had just a year to go. The first time we met, I had gone to use the ATM. On my way back, it started raining heavily that I had to hide under a shade. I was still there hoping and praying that the rain would stop when suddenly a car pulled over and parked in front of the shade. Leo wound down and bade me to hop in. I was reluctant because I didn't know him. I just thought of him as one of those guys out there looking for praise to lure to their slaughterhouse, if you know what I mean. "Hey, come in. I'm only trying to help," he said calmly. Before I knew it, I was in his car, chatting like we've known each other all our lives. He asked where I lived and I told him. Then he offered to drop me off at my house. He was a perfect gentleman. When we got to my house, I pleaded with him to come in for a cup of tea and he agreed. We talked about many things for over 2 hours. He told me more about himself and I did likewise. It was obvious that he was a spoiled kid, but that didn't get into his head. He asked if I was living alone and I said yes. I stayed in the hostel from my first year in the university. I only recently rented that apartment because I was going into my final year and I needed to concentrate on my final year project. For him, he never knew what it felt like to live in a hostel. In fact, he lived in a duplex and had a cook and a steward. I asked him what he was doing with all that space and he said he runs a record label too, so he uses part of the space for his music studio. When he told me the name of his label, I was shocked. It was a popular record label in Kenya. I was thrilled when he told me he owned the record label. I had always wanted to sing but didn't know how to go about it. I bottled up how I felt about learning of his label. I didn't want to be too forward. I felt that if he was going to know that I sing pretty well, it's best to show it and not say it. So I decided to wait for the perfect time. It was getting late and it wasn't looking like Leo had plans of leaving. I was enjoying our gist though, but I still had a lot to do before bedtime. So I smartly discharged him. We exchanged contacts before he left. When he got home, he sent me a message that he was home and that he enjoyed our conversation and that he would love to see more of me. I typed a reply, but just as I was about to punch the send button, I had a rethink. I knew deep down how I felt about our conversation and about him, but I didn't want to appear cheap. I deleted the message and sent a one-liner instead. Was good meeting you, have a good night rest. The next day, he called me to come and do a voiceover for him at his studio. I told him I have never done that before, but he insisted that he was going to put me through and that he loved the texture of my voice. He also told me that he was willing to pay for the voiceover. It was way above what my parents gave me for my upkeep for one session in school. I accepted and he sent me his address. When I got there, everything was already set. I saw some of the people I see on TV. I was a bit shy. Part of the voiceover included singing. He told me that it was not a must to have a good voice for singing. The moment I began to sing, Leo was amazed. I couldn't help but notice the shock on his face. What in the world are you doing with that voice? Your voice is driving me crazy, he said, still in shock. Well, I don't know that, I replied. He asked me if I have written any songs. I wanted to lie, but I changed my mind. I told him I have a few songs, but I wasn't sure if they were good enough. He then said he wanted to hear them. When he heard the first 2 songs, he literally went gaga. Instantly, he called his board of directors and told them he just found a raw talent and that he wanted them to hear me out. When he cut the call, he told me that they had stopped signing artists till next year, but that he just couldn't help it, that I was good. I told him I wasn't sure if I wanted to start a career in music until I was done with university. He said it didn't matter, that I can cope. That day, he recorded one of my songs. By the time the producer was done with the treatment and all, I couldn't believe I was the one singing. That was my first time to be in a music studio. Leo just sang my praise to everyone that cared to listen. When he met with his board of directors, they heard my song and were thrilled. I was given a contract form to go through and sign. It was about 7 pages or thereabouts. I told them I needed time to go through it and they agreed. The sign-up fee was a whopping 1,500,000 Kenya shillings. The money was so much that I was even scared. That was way above my parents' annual salary put together. Apart from that, I was also going to be given a car and a house. I went home and told my mother about it. She was a bit skeptical, but I told her it's what I've always wanted. She expressed her concerns. She kept saying she hopes that there was nothing more attached to it. I assured her that it was entirely based on merit, nothing attached. I didn't dare to tell my father about it because he would object to it. My dad has always been against me singing. When I told him I wanted to study music in school, he kicked against it, saying it wasn't lucrative, that I should read something more professional. He hated the idea. I signed the contract and was given a house and a car plus 1.5 million shillings. It was a 5-year contract. It took me a few weeks to get over the surprise. My life changed in a couple of days. It was not too long, Leo and I started dating. He took me to places I never imagined I would ever get to in life. I started having meetings with very influential people in the society and of course advances from men. Leo was a very jealous guy. Even when I assured him that I would never cheat on him, he still made sure my social media accounts were handled by my manager. My dad eventually found out that I was signed to a label and was angry. He called to ask if I had abandoned my education, and I told him I will never abandon my education, but that was far from the truth. I barely had time to complete my school project, so I paid someone to write it for me. My life started moving at a very fast pace. 2 years passed and I and Leo were still together, making music and conquering the world, until one day I found out about his dirty secret. He was into drugs big time. He told me that the reason he was telling me was because he can now trust me with his secrets. He even told me that most of the popular music producers and artists were into drugs, that most of them get past border securities easily because they are famous. I was dumbfounded. If there was anything I hated most in my life, it was hard drugs, because I have cousins whose lives have been rendered useless by it. All the respect I had for Leo over the years flew out the window in a minute. I was still pondering over how cruel he can be for doing drugs when he said, "You have a show in Rio de Janeiro in 2 months' time and you'll be carrying cocaine worth $2 million. Don't worry, you won't be caught. I already have everything covered." I thought I was dreaming. "What did you say?" I asked again, just to be sure I heard well. And he repeated exactly the same thing. I was shocked. Without saying a word, I just got up and walked away. He kept calling, but I didn't mind him. That night, I went to sleep at a friend's place. I couldn't eat anything. She kept asking if I was okay, and I told her I was fine. Leo kept calling over the phone, but I didn't pick. Sarah asked if I was having problems with Leo, and I just said it was a usual rancor. I couldn't sleep. I spent the better part of that night thinking of what to tell Leo. I eventually decided to tell him to choose between his drugs and me. When I told him, he just laughed and said I was being childish, that it wasn't anything serious. Then I told him if he knew how many lives he had destroyed by selling drugs, he laughed even the more and said, "Everybody has a choice, Rita." He told me I was going to be paid $500,000 for the trip, and I told him that even if it was 20 million, that I will never do it. I told him that I cannot continue working with him, and then I stood up to leave. Then he said I shouldn't. He said that a lot of money had been invested in me and that I cannot turn my back on him now. I remember the look in his eyes. He sounded like he was threatening me. Then he said, "You are only 2 years into your contract. Just 3 more years and you're free." I told him I would think about it, but as for carrying drugs, that I will never do it. We eventually went for the tour in Brazil, and while in Brazil, I tried to convince Leo to leave the drug business, and he told me it wouldn't be that easy, that his life could be on the line if he dared to do that. Then he opened up to me that the music business was only a front, and that he lied about his parents being wealthy, that they were so poor that they barely had money to even send him to school. He said he was only 15 when someone introduced him to a drug lord in Nairobi. He said he was selling it locally until one day they thought it was time for him to go international. He said they had to train him on how to make music and register the record label. According to him, leaving them now will be disastrous because they made me. I was scared to my bone marrow. I asked him if it was their decision to get me involved in the business, and he said yes. And I asked again if they know about my stand on it, and he said no. That they won't hesitate to end my life if they know that I objected to the demand, because I already know their secret and it was risky. I was so frightened that I began to sweat profusely. Let's go for a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll continue this story. Stay glued. I knew my life was in danger because nothing will ever make me do drugs. It was then that the saying that all that glitters is not gold made sense to me. I started thinking of how to live. I knew Leo loved me and he wanted to help. He told me that the only option would be to just disappear, that I shouldn't even attempt to report them to the authorities because they are highly connected. I started thinking of how to escape. The desire to be famous died a natural death. It was then it dawned on me that not everybody selling drugs today wanted to do it. Some were cajoled into it. I decided to follow Leo's advice to disappear. I started thinking of a country to run to. I didn't tell my parents about it because they would be more worried. I decided to leave for Ghana, but unfortunately, I never made it out of Kenya. On the day I had planned to leave, the only thing I remembered was boarding a taxi from my house, and then I found myself in a dark room. I didn't know how I got there. On the floor were a few dead bodies that were already stinking. That was when I knew that somehow they found out about my plan to escape and brought me there to die. I screamed for help, but no one could hear me. The hut was in the middle of nowhere. For days, I had no food and no water to drink. I was also worried that my parents would be dead worried after not hearing from me for days. That was when I remembered to call on God. I asked Him to forgive me for making Him too small in my eyes, and that I would serve Him for the rest of my life if He got me out of that place. I cried and prayed like I never did before. I prayed and prayed till I could pray no more. As days passed with no food and water, I grew weaker and weaker. Even though I was weak, I still managed to say, I shall not die but live to declare the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. I kept saying that over and over again till I passed out and woke up days later in a hospital. When I opened my eyes, the first person I saw was my mother. Her eyes were swollen. It was obvious that she has been crying. My skeletal structure was already showing because I had not eaten for days. She told me how a hunter had rescued me from that dungeon. I told my mother all that happened and she wept even the more. I thought of reporting the drug cartel to the police, but there was no concrete evidence to nail them. It was my word against theirs. My father took me to a therapist because I kept having nightmares. Every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was dead bodies. The therapy helped, but I also knew I needed a change of environment. I relocated to Ghana after many months and started a new life. I got a job and also got married. I didn't stop singing though. I joined the choir in my church and sang to the glory of God. One day I saw in the news that this drug lord was arrested along with others. I was relieved that my prayer was answered. Don't be so thirsty for opportunity that you drink from every cup handed to you. That's how you get poisoned. I hope that people will hear my story and learn to always seek the face of God in all things. He alone knows the end from the beginning. Wow. If you have been touched by this story, please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And if you know someone who seriously needs to see this, don't hesitate to share it with them. You might save a soul if you do that. In case you want to share your story with us, feel free to write in. Our email address again is thehopebase@gmail.com. And in case you cannot write, you can also send a voice note. I'll leave a WhatsApp link below where you can send in your voice note. Don't forget, as long as you have breath in your nostrils, you have hope. My name again is a God-centered body. Till I come your way again next week, have a beautiful day.